Okay, the finish line is in sight now. We left Lara in the hands of a brand new developer, Crystal Dynamics, and now we're finally ready to see what they could do with the Alien Explorer. It was going to require a bit more than just a new coat of paint. The reputation of the series was in tatters and it was years behind the times. So the first priority before basically anything else was simply to clean shit up. And with 2006's Tomb Raider Legend, that's pretty much exactly what Crystal Dynamics did. The games needed to be able to at least compete with everything else around at the time, and so Legend plays totally differently from any other game in the series so far. The grid layout? Gone. Lara is finally full analog. As such, the game plays a whole lot faster now, and people had also started to frown on players having to load their last save up when they died, so the levels are littered with checkpoints. There was also the need to largely take things back to where the series had come from. While the efforts to expand on Lara's character in Angel of Darkness were welcomed, the almost total lack of anything resembling an ancient tomb in the game was not. So while the game doesn't entirely take place in such areas, it's where the main focus lies. Lara herself still gets character, but on the whole it's not really all that dark and brooding. In fact, it's more like an expanded version of the character she always was before, in that she has more lines this time. And that's kind of it really. In the end they're all pretty much empty words, but more on that later. So yeah, we're basically at 2006 standard now. You can see that the people behind the games had finally started paying attention to the likes of Prince of Persia, for example, probably the game that this is most inspired by. And the end result is, well, let's see now. Legend is a credible effort. I can't knock it for being behind the times or anything. I can knock it, however, for perhaps not being as engaging as it should be. It's that sort of modern game where just about everything feels like there's a big signpost just nearby, telling you exactly where you need to go. The old games could often be frustrating as hell as you desperately looked for something, anything that would give you a hint as to just what you needed to do, but as long as the games didn't go over the top with that, even if to be honest they usually did, that still added to the atmosphere, that Lara was alone, thrust into a situation where she's totally abandoned. In Legend, you're never alone. Once you find the start of a line, you pretty much know that it's going to lead you all the way to the end of wherever you are. There's still the odd puzzle to think about, but they won't bother any seasoned adventurers. They're all pretty much self-contained in their own room, as opposed to the insane tasks of old that stretched out through an entire level. Is this a positive? Well, perhaps it is in one sense. I mean, personally, I don't like being stuck with massive puzzles one bit, particularly ones where you know the situation and it just takes an age to carry them out before you accidentally fall down a pit just before the end, 20 minutes after you last saved the damn thing. I mean, nobody likes that. But when all the aspects of that are just stripped away completely, I can't help but feel as though you're taking a bit away from the heart of the game. And there are some things that, well, just don't ever change. Combat, for example. 10 years in, and it appears as though Tomb Raider will never quite get combat right. This is still a game where you deal with virtually all threats by holding the fire button down, jumping and rolling. Only this time it's even easier than before because enemies are dumb bullet sponges and Lara is like a T-1000 in comparison, barely affected by a shotgun blast to the face and with an endless supply of medkits should the need ever arise. And if one thing will ever get in the way of your progress, it's the camera. In close-up situations and narrow paths, it shits the bed, often focusing completely on Lara and blocking your view of wherever you need to jump next. This is frickin' annoying. Although not as annoying as the addition of, oh yes, Simon Says sequences. Some of the most breathtaking action sequences of the game require Dragon's Lair style directions to be pressed in order to get past them. And yeah, they may well look good. But in the olden days, the series still frequently had sequences like this and trusted you to be able to do it yourself. QuickTime events aren't always terrible, but the general action needs to match up with them, and they shouldn't be bloody everywhere. Otherwise I'm just sitting here following prompts and thinking, why on earth am I no longer trusted to do it by myself? But I would perhaps reserve my biggest complaints to something I alluded to previously. The companions. They are always in your bloody ear. One of them's a dullard who has dreadlocks, and the other is inconceivably more of an English stereotype than Lara. They're always there, filling any potential moment of wonder with banter, replacing any idea of what you could do with what you have to do. They shouldn't exist. They go completely against everything that the series used to represent. Core design, for all their faults, never once strayed from the idea of Lara Croft being alone, of having to figure out everything entirely by herself, meaning you had to do the same. This was what gave the game so much atmosphere. It was what made me put a character into a game that wasn't really there. It was what made people like me look up to Lara Croft as something different. It was what made her stand out. Otherwise she could have just been anybody. And now all of that's gone too. Lara Croft could, quite literally, be anybody. Because don't think for a second that it's replaced by a more well-rounded character. We can clearly see what Crystal Dynamics wanted you to look at. This is a heroine who, even in the heat of craziness, will now do the signature handstand off a ledge just about automatically. It doesn't even require a freaking special combination. There's virtually no character to speak of. And while there's lots of story and cinematic moments, well, the plot of the game would have been rejected by the makers of the Tomb Raider movies as entirely too dumb for words. In closing, I don't hate Tomb Raider Legend. At a base level I can have fun with the game's jumping puzzles, or I can look at the decent graphics, or I can even have fun with the odd sequence that changes things up, such as, say, the bike riding. But it doesn't feel anything special, especially not nowadays. In making this game, Crystal Dynamics started almost totally from scratch, and they wiped out everything, including a great deal of the things that genuinely made Tomb Raider special, and made you stick with Lara Croft no matter what. I understand that things had to change. After the Angel of Darkness, there's no way Core could have continued. And the change worked. Lara Croft was welcomed back with open arms, Legend got the most praise any Tomb Raider game had had for years, and it sold millions. It's one of the best-selling games in the franchise. Lara Croft was back from the brink. In fact, she was as popular as she ever was. But in many ways, I didn't recognise her anymore. Or rather, she'd just been stripped back down to what, if I was being honest, she had always been. Lara Croft, characterless British sex symbol. You could forget about that in the old games, but you can't here. Some things, you know, they're just better left unsaid. You always knew that in the back of your head, I guess, but it still sucks when it's so bloody honest about it. So no, I don't like the direction in which Crystal Dynamics have taken the series with this game. Legend in the end is as well made and as modern a title as it is a thoroughly depressing one.
I am relieving myself too.
So, having created an entirely new Lara Croft, Crystal Dynamics' next step was to go back to the past. They would commemorate the anniversary of the series by remaking the very first game. However, they weren't the only ones to try and do it. In June of 2006, a trailer for Tomb Raider Anniversary came out, but it wasn't by Crystal Dynamics. It was by Core Design, and it was apparently going to be released for the PlayStation Portable based off a new free-running engine, the Alien Software House's last attempt at salvaging the franchise for themselves. However, mere days after the release of this trailer, Eidos announced that yes, there would be an anniversary edition of the new Tomb Raider, but it would be made by Crystal Dynamics, not Core. This was Core's last involvement with the franchise. Eidos sold them off to Rebellion, who ultimately shut the studio down for good in 2010. Crystal's anniversary game would come out in 2007 for all the big platforms. Kinda missing the anniversary by a year, but hey-ho. Let's have a look at it. Well, at least there's no one blathering in my ear constantly. At least the storytelling remains largely the same, with gameplay and atmosphere taking centre stage. And despite all of its faults, Legend wasn't a bad game to actually play, and seeing as this is just a slightly updated version of that engine, there's no doubt that you'll have fun playing this if you already enjoyed Legend. It's the original Tomb Raider game, only, you know, streamlined, with things like boss battles where you dodge at the last minute, quick time events and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And to be honest, well, I've played the original Tomb Raider plenty of times and I enjoy it very much, despite its age. And this remake? Yeah, it's not going to replace it in my mind. It looks nice and all, but, well, there's nothing that makes the game stand out from the crowd, at all. In fact, some moments just seem to have been lost. Do you remember back in the original when you walked into the Lost Valley and suddenly found yourself face to face with a gigantic T-Rex, wondering just how on earth you were going to deal with such a thing? Well, forget all that. It's been replaced by a bog standard boss battle where it's obvious what you need to do. Sorry, didn't want you to think for yourself or anything there. Now look, it may seem as though I'm being incredibly harsh on Crystal Dynamics so far, but after all of these sequels, the films and that, well, these games are just starting to get kind of boring and grating, okay? I want to feel the charge of exploration again, and this just isn't doing anything for me. It feels like a waste of time. Why would I play a dumbed down version of the original Tomb Raider? Why wouldn't I just play Tomb Raider? Phew, that's kind of it for this one, I'm afraid. And so we're back on the road again. Anniversary was only a little stopgap in the grand scheme of things, and Crystal's true endpoint was the actual sequel to Legend, Tomb Raider Underworld. This follows directly on from whatever stupid plot Legend had concocted. Basically, Lara's trying to find her mother, who happens to be lost in the mythical land of Avalon. Look, it's basically like the first movie, only Jon Voight has tits, okay? Enough. Underworld arrived in 2008 with promises that Lara would be better than ever, that old faces from the past would return to the fray, such as Toby Gard, the guy who created Lara in the first place. And hey, the game received some kind of rave reviews. You know, from places like the official PlayStation magazine and Games Radar. Other places that were planning on scoring the game any less than 8 out of 10, well, I just would prefer it if you didn't print those reviews. Look, they even said so themselves. Such events, well, I'm already kind of miffed at progress so far, and they aren't doing anything to restore my trust. But still, we shall go down into the murky rabbit hole depths without prejudice and see Underworld for what it really is. And alas, I'm still not happy. As ever, it's not a bad looking game. All of Crystal Dynamics' efforts have looked pretty nice, in fact. And this one, again, doesn't have any bleating in your ear hole, thank fuck. The levels are also a little bit more non-linear now, which is something of a change, but on the whole, trying to play this damn thing is a nightmare. I mean, I don't know if it's just a shitty PC port or what, but fuck! Somewhere along the line, the controls just got botched totally. Even climbing onto a freaking ledge can be a pain. Just about every other Tomb Raider game allows me to hold up when climbing onto a ledge, and this one doesn't. Instead, if I do that, I try to one-up the freaking wall. And then there's the camera. It's utterly doolally, the worst in any Tomb Raider game to date, including Angel of Darkness. It never knows where it wants to go, constantly puts you at an angle where you're jumping blind, and when you're trying to turn a corner, well, it breaks down completely. I just absolutely hate trying to play this game. And yeah, I've pretty much dismissed it out of hand. Lara is just so dislikable as a character by this point, and the game is so unfun to play, feels so broken, that I dismissed it after playing the first level. Is that bad? Yeah, probably. It's hardly professional, but then I'm not a professional. I have better things to do than talk about these stagnant, dull games. Crystal Dynamics have by now fallen into basically the same trap Core did, and people were starting to notice. Underworld was received on the whole as pretty damn mundane. Once again, the series was way behind the times. Taking the Prince of Persia route just wasn't cutting it anymore. Underworld, just no. Let's move on. The game did sell fairly well though, but not quite to Eidos's standards, which were pretty high because they sorta needed to be. The company weren't doing all that well, making a loss of around £100 million in 2008. And so, at the start of 2009, a deal was reached and Eidos was merged into the big old Square Enix juggernaut, pretty much just becoming a brand from then on. You could still see the Eidos name on games like Batman Arkham Asylum and Deus Ex Human Revolution, but eventually Square Enix just stopped using it. Crystal Dynamics had a bit of trouble of their own, laying off staff in 2009, and so once again Tomb Raider slipped into the shadows. There was a little release in 2010, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, a simple puzzle-based game that was actually fairly well received. It's not a part of the main series, so we won't actually be covering it here, but I'll probably look at it in a supplemental somewhere down the line. Anyway, Eidos or not, Square Enix set out to squeeze all of Eidos's old IPs. Deus Ex, Hitman, Just Cause, the upcoming Thief game. And obviously Tomb Raider wasn't going to be far behind. Crystal Dynamics were retained, but the Eidos brand was not. And guess what? It would be another reboot. People recognised that, well, we needed to see a bit more out of Lara. British sophistication just wasn't going to cut it anymore. The last attempt to make a darker Tomb Raider game, Angel of Darkness, would have been fine if not for, well, everything else. But this needed to take a different tack. And you know what, we hadn't really had an origin story yet. And so, here is that. Tomb Raider. Yep, it's the same name as the first game. And in 2012, shit started to hit the fan immediately. Before I actually get to Tomb Raider, I need to look at the reaction to the game before it even came out because, well, it's a doozy. 2012 was, for social issues in gaming, an interesting year, because it was the one where a fuck of a lot of people actually woke up. Around the midpoint of it, well, there was kind of a perfect storm. Within a few months we had a lot of events that made certain gamers just enraged. BioWare were the first to get the brunt, with the double whammy of the anger over the ending to Mass Effect 3 and the ridiculous witch hunt against Jennifer Hepler, one of their writers. Someone from popular internet shitlord hole Reddit discovered an interview from 2006 where Hepler committed the horrific crime of saying that she didn't particularly like playing games all that much. And the people, having seen this out of context quote, went ballistic, calling her a cancer, writing to David Gader asking for her to be fired, and even sending on some lovely death threats and the like. That event pretty much sowed the seed, and then around April-May time, this happened. YouTube media commentator Anita Sarkeesian set up a Kickstarter for a series of videos examining various cliches and tropes in gaming from a feminist perspective. And various gamers interpreted this as, "This horrible woman is gonna take away our video games," and went utterly apeshit. The sound of two brain cells coming together and having a punch-up was heard throughout the web. The reaction to the chaos was kind of like Jennifer Hepler, only about a dozen times worse. Death threats, rape threats, oh boy, you name it. And Anita, God love her, didn't stand for it either. She highlighted the abuse she was getting and quite rightly made a big issue out of it because it was not fucking okay. The end result was one whopping great strides and effect in which a $6,000 Kickstarter ended up making 6 figures. Muchas gracias, you shitty misogynist pig fools. And from then on, well, things started to change. People, at least some of them, became a bit more socially aware, recognising that actually gaming does have a big problem with sexism, racism and the like. They were less afraid to speak out. One reason why happened. The ripples are all still very much felt to this day, with a constant battle waging between the people who just wish to keep gaming as a strict straight white male clubhouse and, well, sanity. You probably know already which side I'm on here, and if this last paragraph has pissed you off in any way, then, well, rest assured that I make absolutely no apologies whatsoever for having pissed you off, because that's your problem, not mine. Anyway, where exactly does Tomb Raider fit into all of this, I hear you ask? Well, it was basically the first project, post-Sarkeesian, to get savaged for its representation of women. The trailer for the game goes down, ultimately, as a hideous misrepresentation of just about everything the game was going to be about. It featured little more except a young Lara Croft being beaten the shit out of, and worst of all at one point, implying that she was threatened with rape. A stupidly insensitive plot point that, if used in a way like this, basically brings your product down onto the same level as I spit on your grave. Squeenix's response to the outrage was also not exactly satisfactory. People were angry. Hell, I was angry. I expected nothing but shit out of the new Tomb Raider game. It had been years since the series had produced anything worthy of note anyway. Lara had already been turned into the most generic and boring character imaginable, and this, well, it didn't exactly seem like a change for the better. As the release of the game got closer, however, there were a few positive signs. Rhianna Pratchett, the game's writer, came forward to explain what the game was actually going to be about. Newer extended trailers actually focused more on the game, as they should, and it seems like there was actually going to be a decent piece of work coming out after all this. And any of those rape implications were pretty much discarded. The scene in question wasn't removed, but it turned out to involve strangulation as opposed to sexual assault. Now, whether that was always the case or not, I think everyone was just pleased that the scene didn't happen. And finally, the game was released on the 5th of March 2013 with the appropriate tagline of "A Survivor is Born." Now, having pretty much done nothing but savage games throughout this whole video so far, it is a bloody relief to finally get to the new Tomb Raider game, which happens to be one of my favourite games of last year. It was easily the best game in the series since, well, the original 17 years ago. Of course, action gaming had completely changed once again, and Tomb Raider's heavy influence from Uncharted, a game itself influenced by the older Tomb Raiders, is worthy of note. So it may not innovate on the whole, but then so few big games do. And hey, it certainly helps if, like me, you've never had a PS3. The really big change is that the game is much more of an open world, a la Far Cry 3 or the Batman games. Once you get to a level, it's still basically a linear path, but in between you can travel anywhere, collect shit and just develop the story on your own terms. And there's a whole group of people in the game now, something that always puts me on edge with Tomb Raider games, but while they aren't exactly well written, they don't usually get in the way either. It's still Lara's story, through and through, and it is kind of a tough story to tell as well. Lara's obvious hatred of animals aside, the games weren't ever that violent at all previously. But now? Well, there's blood everywhere. Lara's responsible for quite a lot of it, as we'll soon see. The series still certainly features nasty death scenes, only Lee's, they're nastier than ever. A lot of them are kinda hard to watch. Now this is one of the things about a lot of games these days. Even the best told stories feature more blood and guts than a frickin' Eli Roth slasher flick. It's something that I'd like gaming to move away from, but the trouble is that most of the movers and shakers in gaming still think that you need all this blood and guts to appeal to the white, straight bro dudes out there. And that's not my stereotype, you understand. That's theirs. You, me, everybody should be insulted by it. But I digress. I mark it down as a necessary evil, and I move on to the better things, such as, say, Lara herself. The voice performance by Camilla Luddington is fantastic. I mean, thank fuck it's not Keely bloody Hawes doing all of this. The game's story of a boat going into the Dragon's Triangle and crashing in a massive storm with all sorts of ghastly villains around does mainly focus on the tale of Lara being afraid at the beginning, her struggle to accept what she's doing in order to simply survive, her belief rising as she believes more and more in her own capability, and ultimately there's the big coming out party. The early trailers were at the very least right about her getting hurt, because it happens a lot, almost to ridiculous levels. In the end, she's so fucked up that if this were reality, well, it'd be a race between the thugs, the injuries, or plain old septicemia as to which would carry her off first. Still, it all works in the end. She fights against it, continues to persevere and survive no matter what, even as her friends and ultimately her mentor succumb to the madness of the island. It's worth noting that as time goes on, she gets beaten up less and less, she finds it easier to recover, becomes more comfortable with the island. All this happens, but the big deal happens when she becomes truly, heart-stoppingly angry. Enter the grenade launcher. Never has the discovery of a single weapon meant so damn much. Now I suppose you could look at this moment and say, well, hasn't Lara already slaughtered hundreds up to this point? What makes this so special? And well, I guess the reason changed. At first it was simply all about survival. If I don't do this, then I'm not going to get off the island. These people are going to kill me. Here, it's not survival anymore. It's revenge. For all the suffering you have caused, for all the damage you have done to me and my friends, you are going to pay, and you should won. Won, you bastards. Won. Yeah, okay, I understand, it's total empowerment, but holy shit if it isn't fucking empowering. Not just for me as a Tomb Raider fan, but personally too. This was the moment when it felt like after years of complete nothingness, Lara Croft was finally back. Tomb Raider represents that struggle as much as it does Lara's, fighting all the way back and ultimately returning triumphant. There was something we always wanted Lara to be, but knew that she never really was, and now she utterly is. And okay, the rest of the game is pretty good too. It plays beautifully, with jumping, climbing and shimmying that kicks every other Crystal Dynamics Tomb Raider game into the shit bucket where they belong. And amazingly, after 17 years, we finally have decent combat. Few things are as wondrous as Lara and all the many things she can do with her bow. She can traverse gaps, stalk people, maim people, set fire to people. It's glorious. And as an aside, let's just take a brief moment here to thank Hannah for bringing the bow back into action where it belongs. Thanks, Hannah. The big set pieces, when they do happen, still often rely a fair bit on quick time button presses and what have you, but this time the game's actually managed to earn it because the rest of the action feels as though it's on the same level. Collecting things is fun, taking out goons is fun, exploring the world is fun. Everything in this game is something I want to do. My immersion was never shaken at any point. Okay, some things might be superfluous, like animal hunting or whatever, but it's still there. I don't mind irrelevant things when they add to the world. And what a world it is! A truly stunning locale. It's nature as an impassive judge, a world where there's either order or chaos. This ain't your BBC One Sunday evening leisurely stroll in the Masai Mara, it's a potent cocktail of David Attenborough and Werner Herzog, and it gets my vote as video gaming's best jungle. Add to all of this the best music the series has had since Angel of Darkness, and you have a game that I find it very hard to seriously fault at all. Well, I suppose you could actually look at the raiding of tombs, or lack thereof, with almost all of them relegated to subquests, and say that that's a problem. But, nah, Tomb Raider's only a title at the end of the day. There's enough historical artefacts and buildings and the like to satisfy me nicely. Really, the hunting of relics has always been the focus, no matter where Lara ends up. And let's not forget that the series has never exclusively focused on raiding tombs specifically, even as far back as the second game. Come to think of it, you could actually look at all this cultural tourism and hunting of artefacts as a problem in itself, the moral question of Tomb Raider. And hey, I'd love to see a future game in the series explore that as an angle, because, you know what? I feel as though the series is actually capable of doing so now. Back in 2012, I made a little vid that I don't have anymore where I blasted the new Tomb Raider for being an offensive pile of shit that would probably kill the series forever. And in this instance, I am so very glad to be wrong. It took Crystal Dynamics a long time, almost as long as Core had the series in fact, but they made a truly great Tomb Raider game. It's a wholly different beast to the first game, but it's right up on the same level, and perhaps even the best game of the entire series. With yet more excellent reviews and big sales, Lara Croft was once again back. And let's hope that this time she stays there, eh? For now, Crystal Dynamics are busy working on the game's sequel, and there are indeed plans for another film, although so far it's only in the early stages of development. Lara's in a good place now, and covering this whole series has been very interesting. I like, even love some of the games, and there are others that I thoroughly dislike. It's a pretty even balance, in fact. But I've always been a big fan of the series, right from the beginning. Whereas the last generation of retro folk grew up with Mario, Sonic or whatever, this was my teenage years. I grew up with Lara Croft and the PlayStation. That's my field, and I'll happily champion it to Kingdom Come. And it's been a wonderful journey to actually trace the development of Lara all the way from the beginning, through the fame, the call, the films and the fall, through the wilderness, and ultimately to the reawakening. She's one of video gaming's most important creations, whether you like it or not. And hey, let's not forget that she's one of ours to boot. Long live Britain! And with that said, it's time to end this series. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, wherever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.